On today's edition of The Fuel, it is a day of zeros. I'm going to explain why in a minute. But let's get into our review today. And we got a lot to talk about, not just the racing itself. A lot of news stories and stuff that came out in the past couple weeks. So let's get into it. This is The Fuel. What's happening, ladies and germs? This is the PackerMan, and welcome to this week's edition of The Fuel. Today, we had some road course racing today with the IndyCar series and the Cup series. IndyCar was at Road America for the Rev Group Grand Prix, and the Cup series was at Sonoma today for the Toyota Mart 350 on the old sports car course. They brought back the carousel for this year. And I'll explain more about that in a little bit. But both races were surprisingly super clean. And both went by pretty quick as a result. But before we get into all that, it's time to get into some of our news stories of the week. Now, some of these news stories are a little bit late because I didn't really have time to talk about them last week, but we're going to get into them this week, and we got a bit to talk about. First of all, Fred Watch has been canceled for 2020. There have been rumors persisting that for a bit that Fernando Alonso is going to contest the entirety of the 2020 IndyCar Series season, but he basically confirmed on Twitter that it was not going to happen, which kind of sucks. But he did say that if he was going to return to IndyCar, it would be for the Indianapolis 500 for obvious reasons. He failed to make the Indy 500 this year, which also kind of sucks. But he'll obviously, I think, will be back for the Indianapolis 500 next year for the simple fact that he's trying to accomplish the Triple Crown of motorsport, which only one man in the entire history of motorsports has ever accomplished. So I think he'll be back. Bit of tragic news that also came out for the Michigan race. Stewart-Haas Racing employee Sean Soules was killed in a motorcycle/car crash. It'd be 2 weeks ago this coming Tuesday near Statesville, North Carolina. He was traveling southbound on North Carolina State Highway 3 when it collided with a BMW passenger car driven by Douglas Catropa, 47 of Mooresville. According to the North Carolina State Highway Patrol, Catropa was traveling north on Highway 3 when his vehicle turned left onto Johnson Dairy Road and collided with Soules' motorcycle. Soules reportedly died at the scene, while Catropa was uninjured, which stated Catropa was wearing a seatbelt and that impairment or phone distraction are not suspected, and Soules was wearing a helmet and that impairment or excessive speed are not suspected. So this seems like a case of wrong place, wrong time, unfortunately. And so for the Michigan race, all of the Stewart-Haas racing cars had special decals of Sean Soules on them as a special memorial to him. So that kind of sucks, because as a race fan, you never want to hear stuff like that. And now let's get into some racing controversies that NASCAR has had over the past 2 weeks, really. Beginning with the K&N West Series at Colorado National Speedway. It was pretty much being dominated by Hailie Deegan, but on a late restart, Derek Kraus, who is still currently the point leader as I'm saying this right now, basically dive bombed it into turn 1 and door checked Hailie into Jagger Jones, who was starting on Deegan's outside. Hailie managed to come back to him on the final lap and basically pulled a similar move in turn 3, although Kraus looked like he also came down a little bit to try to block the move, and that resulted in Kraus getting spun out and Deegan getting her second win of the season and third career win. And of course, obviously, this incident, had a lot of people divided, saying, "Oh, that was a dirty move by Hailie Deegan," and that all three of her wins have come on, bump and runs on the last lap, which isn't true, because her Vegas win, she actually managed to get underneath the Jagger Jones clean. So there's that. But yeah, there was a lot of salt, about the way Deegan raced, when the fact of the matter is, here's the thing. I mean, I don't necessarily agree with Deegan spinning Kraus out, but here's the thing. Kraus did door check her going into turn 1. I mean, he didn't exactly try to make that corner clean, and he basically door checked Hailie right into Jagger Jones. And Kraus apparently threw a bitch fit on Twitter, and when one YouTuber, Joseph Lombard, who's well known in the community, he basically voiced his opinion about it. Kraus was like, "Oh, stick to YouTube." I mean, I don't know if that was just, a friendly joke or if he was just being a bitch, but if it is the latter, then he's clearly got some growing up still to do, which isn't surprising considering he's not even an adult yet. But Jagger Jones kind of came back on him and was like, I guess you didn't, I guess you forgot the part where you nearly killed me and Hailie going into turn 1. So there's that. So that certainly set the racing world on fire. But then, that was topped by what happened the next day at Iowa with the Truck Series and the Xfinity Series. So, well, the Xfinity Series race kind of went off without a hitch. I mean, initially it was supposed to be the Truck Series on Saturday night, and then the Xfinity Series on Sunday at Iowa Speedway. But rain decided to intercede and rain the truck race out, so we instead ended up with a double header. And there were a couple of things that happened in the truck race that certainly caused quite a bit of controversy. First of which, I believe, I think the guy's name is Austin Hill. He got nudged out of the way by Johnny Sauter during the race for position. Austin Hill got back to him, and it definitely looked like he cleaned Sauter out intentionally. And Sauter was none too pleased about that, and came back around under caution and wrecked Austin Hill's shit. Which resulted in Sauter being parked for the remainder of the race, and then they slapped him with a one race suspension on top of that. Now, there was a lot of debate about whether or not this would affect his playoff status, because NASCAR had instituted a rule that you had to compete in every single event in order to be eligible for the playoff. But in Sauter's case, he was basically being forced out for a race by NASCAR. So they decided to keep his playoff eligibility. Although I would imagine that he was probably on probation for the remainder of the year. And I would suspect that if he does something like this again sometime between now and the playoff, then they'll say, yeah, you're no longer playoff eligible for this season. At least that's how I would do it. So, I mean, does the suspension really do anything? I don't know. I mean, you do get extra playoff points based on where you finish at the finish of the regular season. So that would certainly affect things. In the grand scheme of things, probably not, because he'll still be in the playoff regardless. But, yeah. That was certainly an interesting thing. But then that was topped not too long after when Ross Chastain won the race, but became the first driver since they instituted the new rules for this season to be disqualified from a race win for a truck that was deemed too low in the front. So he basically lost the victory, lost all of his stage points, all of his playoff points, and was given last place points for the race, which meant that Brett Moffitt, who finished second, was moved up and declared the winner of the race. And the funny thing is, he became the first driver in a top tier NASCAR series to win a race by leading 0 laps since 1955, when Herb Thomas was declared the winner after there was a scoring error involving him and Lee Petty. So yeah, pretty crazy to say the least. We had our first disqualification under these new rules. I'm not sure a lot of people expected it would be Ross Chastain though, which kind of sucks. Which kind of sucked because, you know, Chastain, he's been working his ass off to try to stake his claim, you know, in NASCAR. Although he would, you know, make up for it this weekend when he won at Gateway last night, and the truck was legal this time, so he got to keep the win. So now all he has to do is get into the top 20 in points, since he made the declaration that he would switch over to Truck Series points. Because originally he was competing for Xfinity Series points, but I guess they made a rule where you can actually change your the series that you collect points in. So the previous win that he had earlier in the year doesn't count because he wasn't racing for truck points at the time. But now that he has a win, and if he can get into the top 20 in points, he'll be locked into the playoff. So that'll be his goal now. But that's not the only controversial thing that's been happening in NASCAR recently. And we're going back to the Canyon Series West once again, this time at Sonoma. The finish of this race was a clusterfuck, to say the least. And it had one of the most controversial calls, I think, in recent memory for NASCAR. Ryan Preece was leading on the restart, but he was judged to have jumped the final restart, although cameras showed that he was still side by side with the car beside him. I can't remember off the top of my head who it was, but it looked like he was still side by side with them, and the rule is, at least as far as I know, once the leader gets to the restart zone, they can start the race, they can start accelerating, but if the leader decides not to accelerate, then the race goes on the drop of the green flag. And from what I saw on the footage, it looked like Preece didn't go until after the green flag was waving. Yet he was deemed to have jumped the restart. And as a result, Noah Gragson was declared the winner of the race. And Ryan Preece was none too happy, basically accusing NASCAR of manipulating the race, which, I mean, it honestly wouldn't be the first time they've done it. So, I mean, it's frustrating because, you know, NASCAR has never really been consistent with, you know, their calls and stuff, especially with their penalties. I mean, the race at Michigan, there were some people that claimed that Logano may have jumped the final restart, yet he was not penalized for it. Yet here, it doesn't even look like Preece jumped the final restart, yet he got penalized for it. I mean, NASCAR's rules and how they enforce them make no fucking sense. I mean, it's no wonder their reputation is so fucking trash right now. It's because their officiating sucks, and they can't even seem to interpret their own rules the right way. It's ridiculous, and something needs to change. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into the race reviews, which shouldn't really take all that long because not that much in the way of notes, mainly because there wasn't a whole lot that happened. Now I'm going to get to why I said that 0 is the number of the day here today. For both the IndyCar series and the Cup series, both the race at Road America and the race at Sonoma had 0 pure lead changes. The IndyCar race, I think, only had 2 official lead changes during the entire day. And there were a few in the Cup race, but there were none that actually happened on track. There were some that happened on restarts, but there was no actual green flag passes on track after a restart. So both the Cup race and the IndyCar race had 0 pure lead changes in both, which kind of sucks. But by that same token, we also saw something that I don't really recall ever seeing before. Now here's the thing, the official number for the Cup Series will say, well, there were 2 cautions, but I don't count the stage break cautions, because that's what they were. They were the stage breaks. So I don't count those as official cautions. So the IndyCar race also had 0 caution flags for 55 laps. That race went caution free, and then the 90 lap race at Sonoma also went caution free, despite the fact that there were some spin outs, there were some guys off, but NASCAR elected not to throw the yellow flag at all during that race, other than for the stage breaks, which, like I said, I don't count. So both the IndyCar race and the Cup race went caution free today. I don't recall that ever happening before on the same day. Has that ever happened before? And this is actually the second caution-free race that NASCAR has had this year, which is crazy to think about, because before this year, the last caution-free race was 2002 at Talladega, the fall Talladega race that Junior won. And then we get to 2019, and we had our first caution-free race in basically a little over 16 years at Las Vegas. And then it only takes like 3 months after that to get our second caution-free race of the year here at Sonoma. And we also had big gaps in between positions today as well. So let's go ahead and get into it. First up, the 2019 Rev Group Grand Prix at Road America. 55 laps was the race distance. Colton Herta made IndyCar Series history by becoming the youngest driver ever to win the pole. Of course, he made history earlier this year at Circuit of the Americas when he became the youngest race winner in IndyCar Series history. So he makes history yet again. I think he's definitely got some great talent, and I think he's going to be a big star. He just needs to clean up some things, about his driving style. Because again, he's still a young driver. He's a very young driver. He's only 18 years old, for God's sake. So he's definitely got a lot of room to improve. I don't think he got the finish that he wanted to in this race. He finished 8th, I think. But compared to the last couple races where he didn't even finish, I think he'll take a top 10 and a pole. So we got a good, clean start. Alexander Rossi, who started alongside of him, managed to get past Herta for the lead in turn 3. And that is the last anyone else ever sees the lead. Seriously. Rossi led 54 of the race's 55 laps. I mean, we all thought that Long Beach was an ass whipping. No. This was an absolute demolition by Alexander Rossi. This was not running the field. This was not taking the field to the woodshed. This was running them through the wood chipper multiple times over. He led 54 of the race's 55 laps. The only lap he didn't lead was on an exchange of pit stops. I think the third and final round of pit stops, when Graham Rahal led a lap. But then he came in, and then Rossi reassumed the lead after that, and never looked back. And he won by 28 seconds. That's about as dominating as you can get. And 28 seconds on a track like Road America is a big frickin' gap. I mean, you could play the Jeopardy tune, how long it took for the second and third place cars to finally cross the line to complete the podium. But we'll get to that when we get to it. There was some stuff that happened during this race, though, that made things kind of interesting. The race for the lead was non-existent. It was over in turn 3. The battle for the win was over in turn 3 on lap 1. But there were some other battles that happened during the race that slightly elevates this race. And the fact that it went caution-free also elevates it a little bit. I mean, I'm just going to be completely honest. This was not the best race in the world. But at the same time, there were some points that bring it up a little bit. So I'm not going to totally bury it. Although it was a bit boring at times. But I'm not going to completely bury it because, I mean, it went by pretty damn fast. And it went caution-free. So. We also saw the beginning of what's definitely one hell of a drive. Because Scott Dixon goes wide in turn 5, gets on the rumble strips, gets really loose, tries to correct it, and gets nudged in the rear by Ryan Hunter-Reay. But IndyCar officials decided not to take action on it because that wasn't really Ryan Hunter-Reay's fault. I mean, Dixon got on the rumble strips and the back end was jiggling back and forth and he was trying to catch it. I mean, there's not much Ryan Hunter-Reay can do on that one, and I don't think he really meant to nudge Dixon out of the way. So they decided not to take action on that one. So I mean, if Dixon was under control and Ryan Hunter-Reay hit him, then he would have been penalized for avoidable contact. But considering that Dixon ran wide in turn 5, which is notorious for that sort of thing, that's where a lot of the quote-unquote action happens, is turn 5. And also Canada corner and the kink before Canada corner. Those are basically the 3 turns that are pretty notorious at Road America. And we certainly saw it today, especially turn 5 on a couple of occasions. But not enough to throw the caution flag, surprisingly. But yeah, Dixon got spun in turn 5, so he lost a lot of time and basically went from his starting position all the way back to dead last place. And in 55 laps, without the benefit of a caution, might I add, he managed to drive all the way through the field and got a top 5 finish. Now, I will be the first one to admit I am not a big fan of Scott Dixon, but that was pretty freaking impressive. I mean, let's be honest here. For him to get spun out on lap 1 and basically have to start last on the field, and he also lost a little bit of time to the next to last place car, so he had to basically make all that up, and without the benefit of a caution flag gets a top 5 finish. I mean, I might not like the guy, but I respect how good of a driver he is. I mean, he's a 5-time champion for a reason, and he's the 3rd winningest driver of all time. I mean, what more can you say? Of course, the question is, how much longer is he going to drive? Well, I don't know if he wants to retire yet, considering how good he still is. So, I mean, that's really up to him, but I think Ganassi's going to try to hold on to him for as long as possible for obvious reasons. But Hinchcliffe nudges Sato into the dirt in turn 2 after Sato basically turned down into him. So that was under review too. So basically Hinchcliffe was probably would have been penalized for avoidable contact there as well if it weren't for the fact that Sato turned down into Hinchcliffe in turn 2, which sent Sato into the grass. So that was more on Sato than on Hinchcliffe, so they decided to let that go too. So I'm going to give props to the IndyCar officials for basically, letting this race play out and basically staying out of it for the most part. I mean, they've made some very questionable decisions this year. Long Beach certainly comes to mind, and you know how I feel about that one. But for the most part, they basically stayed out of it for this entire race. I mean, there weren't any penalty calls or anything like that. There was another thing that could have drawn the caution late in the race that they decided not to act upon, which we'll get to that in a bit. Simon Pagenaud starts moving through the field in a pretty big hurry after a mid-pack start, so he was coming through. Dixon caught the back of the pack and was now passing some of the back markers, so he was starting to move back through the field. Santino Ferrucci was the first to make a pit stop on lap 5. Strategery. Marcus Ericsson, here's one that probably could have drawn the caution if this didn't work out for Ericsson. Marcus Ericsson completely blew turn 5. I mean, he went in there way too hot and basically went off into the gravel trap and was basically heading right for the tire barrier, but actually managed to avoid it and prevented himself from stalling his car. He was really close to doing it and got back going again. So that was a close call. That could have been the first caution of the day, but managed to keep it going. Rossi's lead is up to 3 seconds after 7 laps, so we get much bigger than that. He was unstoppable in this race. And the crazy thing about Rossi is his contract with Andretti is up at the end of this year. So when you consider the fact that he completely dominated Long Beach, completely dominates Road America. He had finished second in 3 of the last 4 races before Road America, and that he is only 7 points at this point, I think, out of the championship lead. So he is, I think, Joseph Newgarden's biggest challenger to the championship this year. He is going to be the biggest free agent in IndyCar in a long time. I mean, this guy is a talent, and there are going to be a lot of teams that are going to be wanting his services. So if I was Andretti, I'd be trying to find a way to keep him on board that 27 car. And I think Andretti also hinted that it really depends on what Napa decides to do as far as sponsorship, if they're going to continue to support Rossi into the 2020 season, which I'm going to be completely honest, Napa would be a complete and total moron if they didn't decide to support Rossi, because considering how good he's been this season so far, I mean, you'd be dumb not to support him, especially considering that he could be the champion by the end of the year, considering how good he's been running the last 2 months. So yeah, Rossi, he's basically going to be the first domino that falls for silly season this year, because everybody's going to be wondering where he's going to go. I know Penske is going to be looking at him for damn sure. I think Andretti could keep him on board. They just need to have the funding to back him. Dixon gets back up to 14th after getting spun out, so he's already about halfway through the field at this point. Both he and Ryan Hunter-Reay, the guy who moved them out of the way unintentionally, might I add, are moving through the field after starting on black tires. The red tires were falling off quite a bit in the late stages, and the black tires were, I think, over the long run, were definitely better. And of course, considering the fact that there were no caution flags, the black tires, I think, were the way to go. And once people were off the reds, they definitely decided to stick with blacks for the remainder of the race. Will Power and Graham Rahal began to catch Colton Herta for second and eventually get by him, as the 88's tires are pretty much shot at this point because he started on scuffed red tires. And then on pit stops, Herta had a fueling issue. His fueler wasn't putting gas into the car, and the fueler had to basically jig it around a little bit to get the friggin' fuel in. So he had that problem. That cost him some time. Rossi pits from the lead on lap 15 and remains the leader. Joseph Newgarden up to third after the pit stops, continuing to showcase why he is the point leader at this point. Dixon back up to 10th, 15 laps in, so he got spun out on lap 1, and he's already back into the top 10, and we're not even to the halfway point of the race. I mean, that just goes to show you how fast Dixon was in this race. But the guy was basically the class of the field. Rossi with an 8-second lead after 15 laps. Marco Andretti falls out of the race on lap 21 with an electrical issue. Pagenaud and Herta make contact in turn 5. Herta basically tried to make a move on the outside of Pagenaud, and they make contact in turn 5. Pagenaud nearly stalls the car, and Herta has to go through the grass. So they both lose a few spots, but they both managed to keep it going. Pagenaud looked like he almost stalled the car, which would have drawn the caution. but he was able to keep it going now. Dixon gets by both of them to move up to the 7th position. Rossi's lead is up to 16 seconds after 25 laps, so right about the halfway point. Herta manages to get back around Dixon for the 7th position. The next set of green flag pit stops begin on lap 27. Rossi pits from the lead on lap 29. Newgarden and Power, teammates at Penske, start fighting hard for second and almost make contact at Canada Corner when Newgarden had a run to the left side of Power, but he was on the outside of Canada Corner, which isn't going to really work out. At this point in the race, there were a couple of concerns that were rising at this point. First off, because of the fact that this race was still caution-free at that point, and considering how abrasive Road America can be on tires, there was a lot of marbles that were starting to build up outside of the racing line, and there was a concern that if a driver gets onto that, it would basically become like driving on ice and could potentially cause a caution flag. And you could visually see it in the turns on camera. Another thing that was of concern, and this was, I think, what led to the debate of whether or not they should have thrown the caution flag, there were some chunks of asphalt that had been knocked free from one of the curbs. I can't remember what turn it was, but it was basically a big chunk of concrete that was sitting in the middle of the track. It wasn't in the racing line, but it was like right near the edge of the racing line. And there was some concern that maybe they should have thrown the caution flag to move that out of the way, because the last thing you want is a car to hit that, because that chunk of asphalt could basically become a missile. And we've all seen what happens when, debris, especially heavy debris, hits someone in the helmet. It could cause some serious damage, and we've even seen some driver fatalities in recent years because of that. But they elected not to throw the caution, and ended up being a non-issue at the end of the race. And of course, all the drivers were probably alerted to the debris that was in that particular turn, so they knew to avoid it. And it ended up working out. Herta starts catching back up with Graham Rahal for the 5th position. Rossi pits from the lead for the final time on lap 42, which led to Rahal leading his one and only lap of the day, and he was the only other leader of the day. Herta and Rosenqvist stay out an extra lap before they pit the next lap, and Rossi cycles back to the lead and has a 23-second lead with 12 laps to go, and it was pretty much curtains at that point. And then he has a mind-boggling 26-second lead with 7 laps to go. That is an eternity in auto racing. But things start heating up, start to stack up for the final podium spot when Newgarden has Rahal, Herta, Hinchcliffe, and Dixon right on his heels. So the final podium spot was actually starting to heat up a little bit. So the racing back around from basically 3rd to 8th started to get really interesting. Herta, whose tires were pretty much shot at this point, was trying to hold Hinchcliffe at bay for 5th with 3 laps to go, because he had to finish the final stint on reds. Herta nearly loses it in turn 1. At one point, Hinchcliffe actually manages to get by him in turn 2, but then Herta powers back around Hinchcliffe in turn 5, and Dixon actually gets a run around the outside of Hinchcliffe in turn 5. They actually make a little bit of contact, which causes Hinchcliffe to drop back to 8th. And Dixon moves up to 6th, and then Dixon gets around Herta for 5th down the front stretch, and Herta, he basically is struggling to really hang on to the car, and basically I think Rosenqvist and Hinchcliffe get by him, and that dropped them back to 8th at the finish. But nobody was a match for Alexander Rossi, who completely dominates the Rev Group Grand Prix at Road America, winning by 28 seconds and led 54 of the race's 55 laps. Domination at its finest. We had 0 pure lead changes during the race, which It's nothing new for IndyCar. But we also had our first caution-free race of the year in IndyCar as well, so that all worked out, I suppose. What I'm also going to start doing now from this review forward is I'm going to try to start showing the race results as well, and the updated point standings, so we know where everything is. So here are the top 10 results for the Rev Group Grand Prix at Road America. Alexander Rossi, obviously your winner of the race. Will Power, very, very quiet run, but ends up in second. Still hasn't won this year, though, which is a bit concerning. Joseph Newgarden finishes third, but loses a bit of his point lead to Rossi. Graham Rahal comes home in fourth. Scott Dixon, of course, what a rebound after basically getting spun out on lap number 1. And basically having to start last, and comes back and finishes 5th. That's pretty impressive. Felix Rosenqvist, didn't really hear too much about him during the day. His rookie season hasn't gone as well as I think a lot of people had been hoping for, but he does come home with a top 10 finish in 6th. James Hinchcliffe in 7th, Colton Herta 8th, Simon Pagenaud, despite nearly stalling it in turn 5, comes home 9th, and Takuma Sato rounds out the top 10. So, with that in mind, here are the updated point standings. Joseph Newgarden continues to lead the way with 402 points. He leads the way with 3 wins. But, of course, right on his heels is Alexander Rossi, only 7 points out of the lead. From there, it's a bit of a gap. Simon Pagenaud is third with 341 points. So that puts him 61 points behind Joseph Newgarden, which is, at this point, a full race. So right now, it's looking like the championship battle is going to be between Newgarden and Alexander Rossi. And then fourth is Scott Dixon, looking for a record 6th championship, but he's going to have a lot of work to do at this point. Will Power is 5th, Takuma Sato in 6th, so good top 10 run right for him so far. And then Ryan Hunter-Reay, Graham Rahal, James Hinchcliffe, and then Felix Rosenqvist rounds out the top 10. And that's how the points shake out for the NTT IndyCar Series. Their next race is not for another 3 weeks. They have 3 weeks off. Well, they have 2 weeks off, and then the next race is in 3 weeks, which is the Honda Indy Toronto, which is the next street course race at Exhibition Place in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And that's the next event for the NTT IndyCar Series. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into the Cup Series review. Alright, so the 2019 Toyota Save Mart 350 at Sonoma. A couple things of note for this particular race. NASCAR used the full 2.52 mile course for the first time since 1997 in honor of Sonoma Raceway's 50th anniversary of existence. And on a bit of a sad note, this was also Darrell Waltrip's final race in the broadcast booth after 19 years, which is pretty crazy. I mean, he had a long career as a driver, and then he had a second long career as a broadcaster. So congratulations to DW on basically 2 very successful careers. I mean, who can really, how many people can really say that they had 2 successful careers in 2 different fields? Not very many people. So the stages were a little bit wonky this time around. Now, of course, because it was a 2.52 mile configuration this time around, the race was only 90 laps as opposed to the usual 110. So stages 1 and 2 are just 20 laps this time around, with stage 3 being 50 laps. 4 cars had to go to the rear of the field for various reasons. Ross Chastain, Eric Jones, Daniel Suarez, and Cody Ware. Ware would actually have to follow the race later on because he had acute carbon monoxide poisoning, probably from where the crash panels got knocked off, which is really starting to become a bit of a concern in NASCAR, because that's the 5th time that a driver has had to deal with acute carbon monoxide poisoning, which is not something you should mess around with. So I think that's something NASCAR really needs to start looking into, because carbon monoxide poisoning it's a very real danger, and a lot of people have died from it in the past. So I really think that's something that's a safety thing that they really need to start looking at. So Kyle Larson starts from the pole for the 3rd consecutive year. However, also for the 3rd consecutive year, he doesn't finish in the top 10. He seems to have Friday and Saturday figured out, but when Sunday comes around, he just goes blank. His brain just completely loses everything. It's just like, well, what the hell? William Byron takes the lead from Larson in turn 3. This was on the start of the race, so this was not a pure lead change. In fact, we had 0 pure lead changes in this race. I think the first time since I started recording pure lead changes last year that we've had a race in the Cup Series that have had 0 pure lead changes. But on that other note, there were no cautions either, unless you count the stage breaks, which I don't. So Chase Elliott moves up into 2nd as Byron leads lap 1. Byron actually looked good early in this race. It's just that they decided to try a different strategy, and it ended up backfiring on them at the end of the day. So dust started being kicked up at around turn 10, as you know, that's a high-speed corner, and there have been some drivers that have been getting off the track over there. Logano gets by Larson for 3rd in turn 7. Hamlin nudges Larson out of the way for 4th in the carousel, which is making its return. Truex moves up to 3rd on lap 13, and you're going to be hearing a lot about Truex in this race, which really shouldn't be a surprise at this point, considering how good of a road racer he is. So Larson has dropped back to 7th at this point. Truex is right on Elliott's bumper for the 2nd position. And of course, as we've seen since they introduced the stages, because you want to be on pit road and get your pit stop done before the caution comes out, because it takes so long to get around a road course, especially this year, considering they were using the 2.52 mile course. There were several drivers who chose to pit before the end of the stage and forego the stage points. Michael McDowell spins in turn 7 but gets it back going. Logano starts reporting electrical issues, which will become prevalent later in the race. And William Byron wins stage number 1. Oh, I almost forgot. Before we get into all that, actually, you know what? I'll do that. I'll do it after, because I forgot to give my final rating for the IndyCar race. But we'll do that after I do the Cup review. And I'll give the Cup rating, and then I'll do the IndyCar rating, since I kind of forgot all about it. William Byron wins stage number 1. Very uneventful first stage. Those who did not pit came in under green. Who did not pit under green would come in under the stage break, which was about 12 cars, and Hamlin wins the race off pit road. Chase Elliott stays out and leads the start of stage number 2, but he runs wide in turn 1, and that allows Truex to take the lead in turn 2 again on the restart, so no pure lead change. Kyle Busch passes Ryan Blaney for 3rd going up the hill. Clint Bowyer has to pit with a confirmed loose wheel, leaving the right rear. Eric Almirola spins in turn 3A but gets back going. Ryan Newman gets front end damage after running into somebody. Couldn't really tell who. Paul Menard spins in turn 11 after trying to block Michael McDowell, and that leaves McDowell with significant front end damage, and it would not be the last time that he would, be involved in an incident. Kurt Busch and Eric Jones pit on lap 37. Keselowski and Suarez start battling hard for the 7th position. Truex pits from the lead on lap 38, which again is right before the caution or the pits close with 2 laps to go at the end of the stage. Hamlin stays out and inherits the lead and wins stage number 2. I'm not gonna lie, at this point in the race, it was sucking really bad. And there wasn't much else that happened in Stage 3 other than what I'm going to get to at the end of the race, which actually was quite interesting. Truex leads the start of Stage 3. Blaney, Elliott, and Kyle Busch start fighting it out hard for second. Blaney actually had a run underneath the Truex going into Turn 4, but was unable to make the move. Busch nudges Blaney out of the way at Turn 4 for the third position, and then Busch gets by Elliott in Turn 7 for second, but then he got a lot of front end damage as well. So there were quite a few cars that had front end damage, and Kyle Busch's was included in that. And one of the big concerns about something like that is you worry about the engine overheating when you have damage like that. But apparently it didn't do anything like that, despite the fact that it was a pretty damn warm day out there. So didn't really seem to affect him all that much. Ryan Preece gets spun by Ricky Stenhouse in turn 11, but gets back going. Of course, we've seen that before. McDowell spins in turn 10, but it looks like he did that all on his own. Thankfully, he avoids getting T-boned by someone, because there were a couple of cars that were coming right at him. But thankfully, he got back going again. He had to back it up because he was up against the wall. But he got going again and got to pit road. And thankfully, NASCAR did not throw the caution for that. Then Elliott comes to pit road and he says he has no oil pressure. And the crew basically confirmed that they pushed him back to the garage. The engine had basically let go on the 9 car, which really sucks because he was looking really good in this race. Easily had a top 5 car. So that sucks for him. At least he has the win that locks him into the playoff, but I'm pretty sure he would love to have a lot more than just the one win going into the playoff this year. Logano comes in for service with 29 laps to go. At this point, Truex and Busch basically start pulling a Rossi. Because you know how Rossi got out to a 28-second lead? Well, these two basically started doing something like that late in this race. Because at the end of the race, the gap between the two of them was usually within about 2 seconds. Not before their final, not directly after their final pit stop, but as the run went along. They were basically right there together, and everyone else was half a minute back. Seriously. The gap eventually got up to about 30 seconds between second and third. So I guess in a way, both the IndyCar race and the Cup race were very similar in a lot of ways. Because at this point, Truex and Busch are within 2 seconds of each other. And everyone else is almost 12 seconds back at this point in the race before the final pit stops. Truex pits from the lead with 26 laps to go. Kyle Busch decides to stay out a couple of extra laps, which was interesting. Daniel Suarez gets nabbed with an uncontrolled tire penalty, which on the camera it looked pretty obvious that it was uncontrolled, so sucks for him. Kyle Busch comes in with 24 laps to go, so he has some slightly fresher tires. So Truex comes out with an 8-second lead at this point, but Kyle Busch would begin closing that gap down. Harvick starts closing in on Ryan Blaney for third, 15 seconds behind the leader. Keselowski comes to pit road, and it looked unscheduled. And then it never really got a confirmation of what exactly it was that Kes had to come in for. And then his teammate Logano also has to come to pit road with a battery issue, so those electrical issues from earlier in the race played a part in what happened to him late in the race here. And then we had a bit of a surprise. Matt DiBenedetto. What a hell of a job this guy did today. Definitely a very underrated driver. And despite having some good runs this year, he had not had a top 10 finish all year long, which was kind of a surprising stat for me to learn. But he had a great car in this race, especially at the end of the race. He actually managed to get by Newman for 6th. He got by Jimmy Johnson for 5th, and then he got by Kevin Harvick for 4th. And that's where he finished, in the 4th position. I think for his first career top 5 finish. Legitly. Because remember, the only two cautions that we had today were the stage breaks, and he finishes fourth in what is essentially a caution-free race. You know, and to get there, he passed the likes of Ryan Newman, Jimmy Johnson, and Kevin Harvick. So he did a damn good job today, and he deserves to have some good runs. Kyle is slowly eating into Truex's gap. Now, remember when they came out of the pits, Truex had an 8-second lead. The lead is now under 2 seconds at this point. And there's people wondering, well, we knew that Kyle was going to be really pushing hard, especially since he was on the fresher tires. And because Truex came in a little bit earlier, people were wondering if he was maybe saving a little bit. And that certainly seemed to be the case at the end of the race, because the gap got down sometimes under a second, but it would never get closer than that. So we had this great back and forth battle between Truex and Busch. There were times when Busch would close in, and there were times when Truex would pull away. And all the time they were also trying to get around lap cars, which was pretty nerve-wracking. I mean, there was one point with I think 3 laps to go, Truex was getting around Bubba Wallace in turn 4, and Bubba actually went off the track and threw up a cloud of dust, and that was kind of a scary thing. That could have turned out badly, but they got through it, no issue. And Truex was able to hold Kyle Busch at bay to win the Toyota Save Mart 350 and tie Kyle Busch for most wins of this season. And of course, it continues the trend of Penske versus Gibbs. That's basically what it's been this year, and it's basically been Gibbs versus the world, really, because they have 10 total wins so far this season. 4 from Kyle Busch, 4 from Truex, and 2 from Denny Hamlin, including the Daytona 500. So it's really been all Gibbs this year. But, yeah, 0 pure lead changes, much like an IndyCar series, but also 0 caution flags. So that's why 0 was the number of the day. At least it felt that way. Because both the IndyCar race and the Cup Series race had 0 pure lead changes, but both went caution free. So, before I give my final rating for both the IndyCar race and the Cup race, since I forgot to give the Cup race or the IndyCar race its rating, because my mind just blanked for a minute. Let's look at the results for the Cup race and also the updated point standings. Alright, so your top 10 finishers for Kyle Busch in second. Ryan Blaney with a good run comes home third. Of course, Matt DiBenedetto in fourth. Great run for him. Denny Hamlin, top 5 run for him. Kevin Harvick in sixth. At this point in the season last year, he had 5 wins. Yet this year, 0. Ryan Newman with the top 10 run in 7th. Eric Jones in 8th. Eric Almirola, despite all his problems, came home in 9th. And Kyle Larson, he actually got a top 10. So despite the fact that, he had his problems today as well, he still came home with a top 10 finish today. So good job by him, because he's had a lot of bad luck this year. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and take a look at the point standings after 16 races. Yeah, there's your top 10 in the point standings. So now we come to my favorite portion of the review, the final rating. So first I'm going to give the final rating for the IndyCar race at Road America. It wasn't the best race, like, at all. The battle for the win was over in turn 3, but there was still some good racing going on. So My final rating for the Rev Group Grand Prix at Road America, oh, give it a 4 out of 10 for that one. As for the Toyota Save Mart 350, honestly, the first two stages were kind of uneventful, nothing really of note, nothing we haven't seen before since they introduced the stages here. But that battle between Kyle Busch and Martin Truex at the end, that cat and mouse game, made things a little more interesting. So I think I'll give the Toyota Save Mart 350, I'll give it a 4.5 out of 10. So nothing too spectacular, but I mean, it honestly wasn't the worst things in the world, to be honest. There were still some interesting things going on, and some interesting strategy as well. It just felt kind of average, to be honest. Alright, that'll do it for a bit of an extended edition of the Fuel here this week. The next race for the Cup Series is at Chicagoland. So last year it was, I think, the best race of the year, one of the best races of the year. So and it's a 1.5 miles. So if this package is any indication, we'll see another good one next week. So thank you very much for watching the Fuel this week, and until next time, this is the PackerMan signing out. Have a good one.